Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Caprino, author of Breakdown Breakthrough, the professional woman's guide to claiming a life of passion, power, and purpose. Kathy, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Paul. Thrilled to be here.
Are you ready to get started?
Ready.
All right.
Ready to go.
Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Yeah. So, I'm coming from two places. A place where I did write a book, Breakdown Breakthrough, when I had no platform. And I'll tell you the advice that I got I didn't want to hear it, but it was so helpful. I started writing, and I had been an English major and been a copywriter, so I felt I could write. But then I met with an editorial consultant, and she said this. Janet Goldstein was her name. Listen, you're a fine writer, that's not the problem, but I don't think what you have here is your big idea. This is more of a workbook. And I was so just hurt and devastated, and she said, what I think you need to do is research. And at that time, I said, in the meeting, I left crying. It was in the Algonquin Hotel in New York. I thought, what does she mean? I don't need to research. And it was about professional women's challenges, my book. But the next day, I sat on it. So first piece of advice, find someone who you really can trust, who really understands what it is to publish a book, and listen to. I don't mean take every piece of it, but listen to the hard feedback. I went back and I decided, because I used to do market research, I'm going to interview 100 women across the country about their professional challenges, how they got there, and how they got over it. And, Paul, I got to tell you, what came out of that research was basically life-changing for me and business-changing, and it turned into a great book. So research. Do some proprietary research on what you're covering. Don't just think you have all the answers to all the questions, because we can always learn.
Sounds like you got a PhD with that.
Oh, my gosh. And I want to tell you, because I was a researcher, I put down some hypotheses about what I thought I was going to hear. 50% of those were wrong, dead wrong. Like professional women are going to struggle if they don't know how to speak up for themselves, like I didn't. That's not necessarily true. It was a PhD. It was a PhD in professional women's challenges. Yeah, it was so eye-opening and wonderful.
Yeah, I consider this podcast like a PhD in publishing, and the reason I mentioned that is because it's similar format. We have multiple guests on the show. You're actually episode 247, I believe. And,
wow.
And the reason I bring that up is that every guest that we've had, every conversation that we've had on the show, it's always something new to learn. And that's how I learned about the traditional publishers, how many of them want to reach out to people that now have those large platforms, like you mentioned, because with your first book, you're building your platform. And then for your upcoming book, you have the platform. So you're most likely going that traditional route that we were talking about prior to the show. And it's just funny how these things evolve over time, and also how many things change in the publishing industry, because 10 years ago, it was completely different.
It was. And, I got a wonderful publisher, Barrett Kohler, and I got a lot of rejections for the first book. But I remember the president, Steve Persanti, said, you don't have a platform, but I believe you will. And it took me years to have a big platform. I mean, it's 10 years, 11 years later. But, boy, it's that's what you need, someone to believe in you that can see the future vision of you before it's hatched. Because when you're struggling to be considered a viable voice, it's very demoralizing, isn't it? I mean, you feel like, why can't I do this? I have so much to say that's good. But, traditional publishing is facing an implosion of their market, of their business model. So they're looking for someone who can kind of open their mouth on their blog or whatever and sell 10,000 books, right?
Yeah, because they don't want to mess around with the publishing. And that's where you typically have to go either a hybrid or a vanity route or even publish it yourself, because you're still going to have to market your book. And that's why some of these traditional
Right.
publishers are looking for people that have those platforms. So you still get the prestige of being part of a traditional publisher, but you still are having to do all of the work in regards to doing the marketing inside of it.
Yeah, I'm interested what you would say to this and what your listeners would say. Because I was an English major, because I've always been in writing, and now I'm a senior contributor on Forbes. I have high standards in what I put out, and I've heard people say to business owners, just put a book out. Doesn't matter what it's like. Just put it out, self-publish, and you'll get speaking gigs and get $10,000. And it's not true that I don't believe it's true. What you put out should be a reflection of your highest level, right? But I think that no matter what way you go, I think get an editorial consultant or, an editor who can make it the best it can be. The second thing, big advice, while I wrote Breakdown and thought it was great, holy cow, the editorial, really strict feedback made it a completely different book. What do you think about that? Would you agree with me on that?
I think there's three keys to a great book. One is having a great looking book cover with a great title that gets the hook, but also the subtitle, which talks about the benefit to the reader, what they're going to get out of the book, and making it about them. The second part of that is having a compelling book description to help sell the book. But the third key, and this is what I feel makes the biggest difference. This what takes you from a self-published book to a professional book, and that is investing the proper money into finding the best editor that you can. Someone that gets your tone, your voice, but can clean it up and can make it professional. I was very lucky. I found an amazing editor 4 years ago with my first book. I've utilized her for all of my books, all 14 of them that have come out or will be coming out. And the reason I mention that is they're the ones that can polish it up, can clean it up, and really take it next level. But when you're talking about people having a book out there, I don't think people should just have a book for the sake of it. They need to have it to promote their business, but it needs to be done right. And the biggest mistake from what I've seen from authors out there is they're not investing the money to have a proper editor. Get someone that has experience. One of the editors on my team actually had a degree in publishing. So
Wow.
you want to have the best people possible to edit your book, people that do this for a living, that know what they're doing. Because if you're just going to put a book out there and not have it professionally edited, or even try to edit it yourself, or have a family member do it, then that's not the best way to get this book out there. That's a pamphlet. That's not a book.
That's really right. And, some people don't understand what editing is. Like when I say get a great editor, I don't mean line editing. That's important too. I mean,
Yeah.
looking through every sentence in grammar. My editor, Barrett Kohler, would ask me questions that I didn't have the answer to. Like, of these 20 women that you're featuring, what is your model for change in terms of how you're going to present how one goes through change to get from crisis to success? And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So an editor is going to make it better, not just by, grammatically editing it, but asking you questions that
Yep.
have to be answered in a deep way, right?
Yeah, and you have to have someone that you're not going to be afraid of their feedback. You got to find someone that you can trust, because you find a couple of great editors, you can use them for every single one of your books. And when they get to be on this journey with you as you progress through these books, then they're going to understand your voice. They're going to understand the message that you're trying to get out there. And they're going to tell you, hey, maybe you want to tweak this a little bit. Maybe you want to answer this question. And when you can have that type of trust with your editor, and that's why I always recommend work with the same editor for as many of your books as possible, because they're going to make every single book of yours the best product possible to have it out there in the world.
Love it. Love it. Couldn't agree more.
Well, Kathy, what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
So, you've mentioned, and I'm sure you've talked about it 246 times out of your 247, but it is, if you want to go with, a reputable publisher, you do need typically, and I'm talking about nonfiction here, right? You need an agent, and the agent is as hard to get as a great publisher, right? And I mean, what they're looking for is, we talked about it, how big and extensive is the platform and the following. But you know what they're also looking for, publishers? How fresh is the language that you're using? So, I'll give an example. I have a podcast, Finding Brave, and I've trademarked that, and I love Finding Brave. But I got a lot of pushback that where they thought it was going was not fresh and new enough, because there's enough authors who own the market about bravery. And I was just so devastated. Like, to me, that was where I was going. That was where I hung my hat. But one publisher pushed back and said, I see something else in this proposal that I'd really be interested in. And I went back and redid the proposal. And that individual didn't accept it, but that publishing house did. So the hardest part, I think, is do you have a platform? Of course. That means, I didn't understand what that meant, Paul, before. It means, do you have a following, and does that following buy? It's not, I have 900,000 followers on LinkedIn, and that's so great, but they don't necessarily buy books necessarily, right?
Yeah.
A tiny percent of that will. So it's followers who are engaged enough that they're going to buy what you have. But it's also, and I see this over and over, are you saying something that no one else is saying in a language that's sticky? Because no one's going to buy your book or your pamphlet or your workbook if what you're saying has been said 2,000 times before in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
I think I agree with you completely.
Mm-hmm. And it isn't easy. It isn't easy to be fresh and sticky, is it?
And to have a clear message.
Yeah.
I think that's very important.
And, can I add one other thing about this model for change that my editor had said? I just 2 hours ago gave a webinar for coaches who want to build more success and thought leadership. And I really do believe that a lot of people are writing because they want to help people, but they don't have a model for change, meaning they don't have specific strategy, solutions, and tips to walk people through. I mean, it's great. A lot of people learn through stories, but most people learn, let me hear a story about how someone succeeded, but then tell me how to do it. And for most business owners, I don't think they really know how to do it, how to walk through this change, how to make more money, how to whatever the business is. They know how they did it, but I think they often don't know how to present it in a way that it's going to benefit anyone who reads it. So you have to work your material to make sure you have a model for change. Does that make sense?
It does. Well, let's talk about marketing, because clearly you have built quite the following. You said 900,000 followers on LinkedIn?
Yep.
So let's talk a little about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
Yeah, so what I would say that was the most instrumental in Breakdown, Breakthrough, and building a following, my editor said this: you don't want to launch into a vacuum. So I was like, what is she talking about? But what I understood that to mean and how I'm doing it now is, with that first book, I was going to keep all of it. It's about the 12 hidden crises working women face. I was going to keep it all close to the vest. I didn't want to give too much away. I wanted people to buy the book. That is 100% the wrong thing, in my opinion. What you want to do is 6 months before, 8 months before, be offering the thought leadership, the ideas that you go into further depth in the book, but offer that. Offer that in your LinkedIn blog, or offer it on your own blog, offer it on your own podcast. And, when people go, no, that's giving away secrets. If all you have are 60 pages of content, that's all you got, you don't have much, meaning you should have a whole library of ideas and solutions and strategies and thoughts. So don't think like, I'm going to give away what's in the book and they won't read it. I don't find that that's true. I find that the more you can engage and pique interest and get followers and share FaceTime lives and whatever you can, that makes them say, wow, she's got something to say, that's what's going to make them buy the book.
Yeah, my philosophy is give away everything, and then what we charge for is implementation. So we'll give you all the information in the world, but if you're needing to work with someone to take it next level, that's when we had people coming to us. But always to give generously. One of my favorite books that I've been reading recently is The Go-Giver, which has been recommended by many of my podcast guests. So I'm like, I got to check this book out. Unfortunately, we've had a very similar philosophy since getting started, and it works. I mean, when you give, it comes back in a great way.
And, on this webinar I just had, somebody asked, I'm trying to do research. I put out an email and asked people to open up, and they're not doing it. We've heard this a million times. I think it was Scott Stratton who said this the first time I ever heard it, but people are going to buy from people they know, like, and trust. Mm-hmm. Well, you have to demonstrate that 5,000 different ways. Is Kathy or Paul likable? Do I trust them? Is what they're saying aligned with my values and my beliefs? So you don't just want to come out with your book. You want to have really demonstrated who you are and what you're sharing months before the book comes out. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I do want to ask you about LinkedIn. So you mentioned you have 900,000 followers. How were you able to build it to that level?
Yeah, and some of it is a bit of a mystery, but I'll say this. There's some lessons in this, I think. 4 years ago, 2014, I got an email, and I remember two things. I'll make this quick. I had 500 connections at the time, which is 6 years ago, I think. And I remember seeing someone had 1,000 plus or 500 plus, and I'm like, I like that number. I want to get to 1,000. So I actively started engaging more on LinkedIn, and I got to 1,000 very quickly. Then 2014 came, and I got an email that LinkedIn was opening up their publishing platform. You could blog through LinkedIn. And I think it was only a handful of people, maybe a few hundred, I think. And I said, well, what the heck? So I wrote a post, and I think really I only had a few thousand followers then, maybe. No followers. I had a few thousand connections. I wrote a post, did okay. I wrote another, did okay. And then I think it was maybe 3 months into it, I had a post that went viral, 3 million views. And it was 6 toxic behaviors that push people away, how to recognize those in yourself and change them. And, Paul, I got to tell you, I wrote that thing in 30 minutes. It just came flying out. Sometimes my posts do. But it touched a chord, talking about your title and subtitle. But what shocked me was people were saying, oh, my gosh, I'm toxic. And that's like music to your ears when you've created a breakthrough for people, right? That they see themselves differently. So I heard from LinkedIn, and they said, wow, that might have been, I think it was one of the top 10 viral posts in 2014. So then what happened was they said, listen, we are trying to market this so more people will use it. Would you want to kind of be interviewed to see if we could send a video team to come and do a video of your work? I'm like, yeah, okay. So I did it, and I was one of 3 people, and they sent a video crew with something like 13 people to my home, did a 2-minute video on why I publish on LinkedIn. Then that went viral. And then I believe that they had me as their new app came out. I mean, this seems like 100 years ago, but it was only 5 or 6 years ago. And they put me as a professional women's expert and a career expert. And it started to be, Paul, that I would get 1,000 new followers a day. That has slowed down. It's more like 200 new followers a day. But it just built from there.
It's amazing what one viral post will do.
Wow. Yeah. And LinkedIn's my happy place. I love it. I mean, I call it the cocktail party in the sky. Everybody should be on it. Everybody should be using it. And I look at so many LinkedIn profiles, and I teach about how to write your LinkedIn profile, that I can literally look at someone's profile, and in 5 minutes I understand more about their work than they would want me to. Are they showing up? Are they hiding? Do they know how to talk about themselves? Are they using the prime real estate of their headline as something juicy that's going to get attention for what they want? Oh, it goes on and on. So everybody connect with me on LinkedIn. I love it. It's it's so fun to me.
Well, and I'll also mention I'm a big fan of LinkedIn too. 90% of our guests on the show, my team reaches out to them through LinkedIn to connect and to also invite them onto the show. Typically, we only have 2 rules. 1, you either have to have a book out, or 2, you have to have a book that's going to be coming out within the near future. And it's just a LinkedIn really is a treasure that I don't think enough people take advantage of. They focus more on Facebook and on Instagram, but they don't really focus on LinkedIn. And for what I've seen, LinkedIn's a gold mine for just a wealth of information, for prospecting, for building relationships. So when you mentioned you had 900,000 followers, I'm like, we got to take a little deeper dive into this.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a gold mine. I love it. And some of my dearest colleagues now from around the world just said, hey, I love that post. It kind of really spoke to me. And then you get talking, and then you're helping each other. That's the other thing. That's another piece of advice, Paul. I'm guessing you would agree. We need other people to be successful.
Oh yeah.
And so many people. I've got a good ego. I've got self-esteem. I used to think I can do it alone. I don't need help. Well, you do need help. You cannot get to the highest level alone. So, LinkedIn with what is it now? 550 million people. Why wouldn't you be out there and helping people? It's not just reaching out with your hand out.
Exactly. Give value.
But, reaching out to you. Paul, I love your podcast. Say something. Be of use. Not just to get something back, but just be of use. Be of service. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Yeah. I read it a long time ago, and it's Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And if people don't know about it, he was an Austrian psychiatrist and neurologist who was a Holocaust survivor. And he began to look at why did that incredibly horrific experience flatten people and kill them, and why did other people in some ways thrive through it? And he created something called logotherapy, which is a form of existential analysis, but he believed that people were primarily driven by striving to find meaning. And I got to say, in my unhappy 18-year corporate life, I had no meaning. I had no purpose. The work felt so meaningless, and my life showed it. I was chronically ill. There were narcissistic bosses. I faced discrimination, sexual harassment. It was pretty rough, frankly. But it struck me, this one quote: everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. I just fell off my chair. I'm like, that's it. And what am I choosing? And how am I letting these crises devastate me? It was a life changer. You know how a little book can, and it's a little book, but it changed my life. Love it.
And I was going to ask what's your favorite quote and why, but it sounds like that was your favorite quote. Am I right on that?
Well, I got another one.
All right, let's do it.
One. And I mention it in every talk. It's Einstein. You cannot solve a problem on the level of consciousness that created it. So why do I love that? I'm not just a coach and a speaker. I'm all about breakthrough. I mean, that's why I named my book that, Breakdown Breakthrough. I want every call to be a breakthrough, every speech to be a breakthrough. I mean, I know that sounds kind of highfalutin, but if we can change our awareness about what we're dealing with, if we can shift our level of consciousness around it, then we're going to have exponential growth. So I love that, and I really believe it's true. You can't solve a problem on the level of consciousness that created it, and usually you need outside help to help you shift that. That's my favorite.
Kathy, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show today. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And there'd be two places, or three: KathyCaprino.com, my podcast, FindingBrave.org, and you can search in Caprino Forbes in the Google search bar, and you'll find my Forbes blog, Career Bliss. Those would be the best three places. And thanks so much, Paul. It was fun.
Well, Kathy, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.